They said I was just the bookworm in the corner, always reading, always quiet. But then the priest stepped up to the mic and announced that the entire wedding, every flower, every chair, every flute of champagne, had been anonymously funded by a $70 billion tech CEO. People gasped. My mom clutched her pearls, and that's when I stood up, walked to the front, and said, "That CEO is me." Hi, I'm Natalie. For most of my life, I was the girl they forgot to mention, the one behind the camera, never in the frame, but on that day, everything changed, on my terms. Before we dive into the story, I'd love to get to know you a little better. Drop a comment below and let me know where you're watching from. That way I can send you a special shout out. Now let's begin our story together. The envelope was cream-colored and elegant, sealed with a faint gold crest, but my name on the front was misspelled. Again. Natalie Brooks. No I, no attention to detail. Just enough to say they remembered me, but not enough to show it mattered. I stood in my kitchen, sunlight catching on the edge of the butcher block counter, and ran my thumb along the flap. The wedding was in 2 weeks. No note. No, "We hope you can make it." Just a card with swirling script and a schedule packed with monogrammed brunches and family photo ops. The only thing missing was sincerity. I placed it beside a coffee mug still half full and stared at the invitation. It reminded me of that Christmas when everyone in the family got matching silk robes from Bloomingdale's. Mine had been fleece, discounted, 2 sizes too big. "We weren't sure about your size," my mom had said brightly, though she'd bought Vanessa's in tailored petite. I remember smiling and thanking her. I always smiled and thanked her. My phone buzzed. Jasmine. I picked it up and walked toward the back room, away from the open windows. The call was encrypted, standard for us. On screen, Jasmine's face came into view, framed by her short, midnight black bob and the clean lines of her home office in Seattle. "Hey," I said. "You see the final doc?" she asked without preamble. Her voice was crisp, just like her blazer. "Just skimmed it," I replied, grabbing a pen and tapping the back of my notepad. "Everything from Zurich looks solid. Tokyo's on board? They signed off 20 minutes ago." I smiled but didn't show it. "That means we're locked." She nodded once. "Midnight Friday, just ahead of your sister's big day." I almost laughed. "The timing is poetic." Jasmine leaned closer. "You sure you want to go? They didn't exactly roll out a red carpet." I walked to the window and watched a young couple outside push a stroller past the bookstore below. A small dog trotted beside them in a gingham vest. "They didn't even spell my name right," I said. "But yes, I'm going." "Because of the press?" "Number. Because they still think I'm the girl who disappears into dusty corners." Jasmine was quiet for a beat, then said, "They're in for a surprise." I didn't answer. I was already drifting into the memory of the day I won the regional coding competition back in high school. I was 16, the only girl in the top 5. I'd stayed up nights perfecting a natural language processing model that could simulate small talk with a frightening level of realism. I placed first. My name was in the local paper. I taped the article to the fridge. No one ever mentioned it. The fridge was cleaned the next day. I still remembered how I'd sat through Vanessa's entire senior year musical. Twice, even the dress rehearsals, while she sang off-key and our parents clapped like she was a Broadway legend. "They just don't know who you are now," Jasmine said gently. "That's the point," I replied. "They're going to learn." I ended the call, closed the laptop, and stood still for a long moment. The quiet in my apartment was familiar. Not lonely, just intentional. Everything here was chosen. The cool gray walls, the eucalyptus-scented candle I hadn't lit in months, the small black turntable in the corner with a single record always ready, Miles Davis. Kinda blue. There was comfort in precision. I walked toward the hall closet. On the top shelf, behind a stack of winter scarves I hadn't used in 2 years, was a black garment bag. I pulled it down slowly, unzipping just enough to see the shimmer of deep emerald silk beneath. They think they've seen me dressed up before. Business casual at best, flats, a cardigan, maybe mascara if I remembered. But this was something they wouldn't forget. I laid the garment bag on the bed. My reflection caught in the mirror across the room, and I studied myself for a moment. Hair tied back, no makeup, oversized t-shirt. To them, I was still the bookworm, the one who worked in data or something, the sister who always smiled politely and stepped aside. But I knew what was coming, and this time, I didn't need to be invited properly to make an entrance. I turned back to the invitation still lying on the counter. I picked it up one more time and traced the typo with my finger. "They won't see me coming," I said softly. Then I zipped the garment bag shut. "You're here!" Vanessa's voice rang out before I even reached the end of the path. She stood near the entrance to the garden terrace, framed by climbing wisteria and soft peach drapes. Her arms opened in an exaggerated welcome. "We thought you weren't coming." "I got the invitation," I said simply. She blinked, then smiled too wide. "Right, of course. Mom sent those. You look comfortable." "I dressed for brunch," I said, smoothing the front of my linen dress. It was a soft gray blue, simple, polished, understated. I had chosen it the way I chose most things, deliberately. Inside the garden, the air was syrupy with late summer warmth. Gardenias lined the walkway. Tables were draped in ivory cloths and set with gold-rimmed china and monogram napkins. A string quartet played softly under a magnolia tree. It was all very southern, very curated. A staff member with perfect posture led me to a table near the back, just left of the service station and a bit too close to a humming fan. A quick scan of the long table confirmed the pattern. Vanessa and Spencer were seated dead center with both sets of parents flanking them. Aunts, uncles, family friends extended outward in rings of relevance. I was placed like an afterthought. Behind a potted fern, I could barely see the couple. Not that I needed to. I folded my napkin across my lap and reached for the glass of water already sweating beside my plate. A waiter arrived with a small basket of biscuits. I murmured a thank you. He smiled like he recognized the dynamic but said nothing. Across from me, Aunt Karen adjusted her pearl necklace and said, "Natalie, dear, what is it you do again?" "Still with the books?" "Sort of," I replied. "I work with predictive systems and large-scale data modeling." She nodded as if I'd said, "school librarian." "Still so smart. Just like when you were little, always in a corner with your head in a book." Uncle Ray chuckled. "You should meet Spencer's Kindle," he added. "You two would get along great." There was laughter, light, polite, oblivious. I smiled and took a bite of the biscuit. It was flaky, buttery, and slightly warm. Someone at this brunch had done their job exceptionally well. Not everyone was phoning it in. My phone buzzed under the table. Jasmine. "Final board signatures tomorrow at 9 a.m. Zurich confirmed." I let the message sit for a beat before replying. "Me. Good. Hold press until after." A second buzz. Jasmine. "You sure? It's clean. Big impact if we drop it ahead of the wedding." Me. "Not yet. I'm not done listening." At the front of the table, Evelyn rose to introduce a guest from the Langley side. When she gestured vaguely toward me, she said, "And that's our Natalie, our quiet one. She's always been thoughtful, always reading something." The way she said it was gentle, almost affectionate. Almost. I looked up and caught her eye. She held my gaze for half a second, then turned back to her speech. It was like being applauded for your invisibility. A waiter poured fresh juice into my glass, orange, with a hint of something floral, maybe elderflower. I thanked him again and he gave me a subtle nod before walking off. Vanessa stood now, holding a glass of champagne. "I just want to say thank you," she said, voice bright and beaming, "to everyone who's helped make this weekend so magical. Your support means everything, to me and to Spencer. We feel so loved, so lucky, so seen." Her eyes scanned the crowd as she said it, skipping over me like I wasn't even there. I didn't expect her to name me. That wasn't her style. Her thank yous were always for the people who made her shine, not the ones who held the light steady in the background. Spencer stood as she sat down, his arm draped around her chair. He lifted his glass high. "To the future Langley Empire," he announced, "and to those who support it." There were cheers, the clinking of glassware, a ripple of approval. I raised my glass slowly, letting my eyes settle on his. I didn't smile. I didn't blink. He grinned at me across the table like he was throwing me a bone. "And to Natalie," he said with mock warmth, "who proves every family needs someone keeping the archives." The laughter was quieter this time. Not all the guests caught it, but I did, and he knew it. I set my glass down without drinking. Aunt Karen reached for another biscuit. "Spencer's so charming," she whispered to me. "You know, he reminds me of your father when he was young." I didn't respond. Beneath the table, I unlocked my phone. Me, Jasmine, deploy. I tucked the phone back into my bag and folded my hands neatly in my lap. Outside, cicadas buzzed faintly in the trees. A breeze lifted the edge of the tablecloth, and somewhere across the country, a quiet system began to hum to life, because I told it to. The chairs were already filled by the time I arrived. Rows of ivory cushions stretched across the manicured lawn behind the Brooks estate, framed by oak trees strung with glass orbs that caught the golden hour light. A quartet played something soft and string-heavy, likely Bach, though I couldn't quite hear it over the hum of mingling voices. I was guided politely but firmly to the second-to-last row, close enough to hear the music, far enough not to be noticed. From my seat, I could just make out the ivy-covered arch at the front where Vanessa stood beside Spencer. Her dress was everything I expected: white silk, fitted bodice, soft mermaid train. Her hair fell in perfect waves over her shoulder, and when she turned slightly to laugh at something Spencer said, it caught the light just so. She looked like a bridal magazine cover come to life. Our mother stood a few feet away, fussing with a ribbon on one of the flower arrangements, though it didn't need fussing. She did things like that when she was nervous, repositioning perfection to make it hers. When Father Thomas stepped to the front, the quartet quieted, and so did the guests. He smiled gently, the way someone does when they're about to say something unexpected. "Before we begin," he said, "the couple has asked me to share a brief note of gratitude. As many of you know, today's ceremony and much of this weekend's celebration has been made possible through an anonymous gift." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Several heads turned. I saw Aunt Karen lean toward her husband, her mouth forming the words, "Did you know that?" Father Thomas held up a hand, waiting for silence. A gift from a leader in the field of artificial intelligence, someone whose impact on the tech world has been both transformative and, until now, largely behind the scenes. They've chosen this moment to step forward. He paused, then turned slightly, as if giving a signal, and just like that, every eye turned toward me. I stood slowly. I hadn't rehearsed this moment. Not exactly. But I'd lived with the weight of it for so long that the steps felt instinctual. My heels pressed softly into the grass as I made my way up the aisle. The music had stopped. Even the breeze seemed to hush. I passed uncles with jaws slightly slack, former classmates blinking in surprise, and Evelyn, my mother, her hands frozen mid-clap around her clutch. Vanessa didn't move. Spencer tilted his head, squinting as if trying to make sense of what he was seeing. When I reached the front, Father Thomas stepped aside and I took his place at the microphone. For a brief moment, I looked out at the faces, some familiar, most forgettable, all of them watching. Then I took a breath. "That CEO," I said, voice steady, "is me." Dear friend, what would you do if you were in my shoes? I bet you can't guess what's coming next. But before we go any further, drop a 5 in the comments if you're still with me, because what happens next might just leave you speechless. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was loaded, like everyone had inhaled at once and forgotten how to exhale. Someone in the back coughed. I heard the clink of a wine glass tipping somewhere to my right. Evelyn's face was unreadable. Her lips were parted slightly, but no sound came. Vanessa looked as though someone had pulled the floor out from under her. Her fingers tightened around the bouquet. Spencer's expression shifted from confusion to something else. Recognition, maybe. He knew the name, the company, the acquisition that had slipped through his firm's fingers months ago. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. Instead, I turned toward the screen that had been set up behind the altar, the one reserved for a short slideshow of childhood photos and engagement highlights. At that exact moment, the projector flickered to life. The image blinked once, then settled. A title appeared in clean white text on a black background. Before the vows, there's something else you should see. And then the music changed. Not live this time, but recorded. A quiet piano track. Gentle, deliberate. I stepped aside. From the corner of my eye, I saw my father shift forward slightly in his seat, elbows on knees. Spencer glanced sharply at Vanessa, who was staring straight ahead like she couldn't, or wouldn't, move. The first image appeared. A teenage girl at a computer desk in a dim bedroom. Cords coiled under the desk, notes taped to the wall, a glow from 2 monitors. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun. No makeup, no spotlight, just focus. The narration began, soft and measured. My name is Natalie Brooks. You may know my sister. You may know my family, but you probably don't know me. The camera panned over headlines. Quiet force behind predictive AI firm. Anonymous bidder acquires Virion subsidiaries. Selling. The librarian CEO? There were clips from closed-door conferences, blurred faces in dark suits, charts, algorithms, a map lit with real-time data flows. Then Jasmine appeared briefly in a quick clip saying, "Natalie doesn't just understand systems, she builds new ones." The video wasn't long, maybe 3 minutes, but every second rewrote a narrative that had lived in that family for decades. As it ended, the final frame lingered. Solara Metrics founder and CEO Natalie Brooks. The screen faded to black, and the lawn stayed quiet. Nobody clapped. Nobody said a word. But something had shifted. They saw me now. Not just the bookworm, not the girl who disappeared into the background at recitals and birthdays, not the afterthought in family photos. They saw me, and for the first time, I didn't need to explain anything. The mic still stood a few feet behind me. I didn't return to it. I simply gave Father Thomas a slight nod and turned toward my seat. As I passed Vanessa, I saw her lips press into a line. Her bouquet trembled just slightly. Spencer didn't look at me. His jaw was tight. Evelyn's hand clutched her purse as if it were a life preserver. I returned to my seat. The air was different now, thicker, slower. The quartet didn't resume playing. Then the screen blinked once more, and a second title faded in. Part 2, The Choice We All Make. And just like that, it wasn't over. The screen lit up, and so did their faces, though not all for the same reason. I didn't look behind me. I could feel them shift in their chairs. Silk dresses rustled. A champagne flute clinked softly against a plate. Somewhere to the left, someone inhaled sharply, the kind of breath you don't mean to take but can't stop yourself from taking. The music was gone now, replaced by silence and the low hum of the projector, which had become the center of everything. The first image was simple. Me, much younger, hunched over an old laptop in a campus dorm room. My voice came through, soft but clear. I used to wonder if people like me ever mattered loud enough to be heard. That clip faded into a grainy late-night shot, my hands typing while a cup of instant coffee sat beside the keyboard, untouched and growing cold. I didn't have a pedigree. No one was waiting for me to impress them. I just kept building. The footage jumped forward. A montage. My first job, stacked monitors, whiteboards filled with code. Then a quick clip of Jasmine in a sleek, window-lit space, introducing a prototype of what would become Solara's earliest interface. "The real power," she said into a mic, "is in understanding what people need before they know it themselves." More cuts. A contract signing in a windowless boardroom. Faces blurred for privacy, but the tension in their body language spoke volumes. Voiceovers layered with my narration. Data privacy, infrastructure analytics, global transportation modeling, AI deployments no one ever connected to me. The guests didn't blink. I could feel it. A new clip. Me again, now older, more poised. The lighting was dim. One of those closed-door investor briefings where no one took photos and everyone took notes. I was on stage in a tailored navy suit, holding a remote. "My name is Natalie Brooks," I said on screen, "and Solera Metrics doesn't sell to users. We serve systems." I remembered recording that speech. I'd rehearsed it in front of a mirror and again in my living room, alone, until I knew every inflection by heart. I wasn't aiming to impress. I was aiming to be undeniable. On-screen graphs shifted, contracts closed, headlines flashed. Unknown shell firm buys up 7 key analytics patents. Blackout intelligence network beats Wall Street to $2.6 billion deal. Who owns Solara? Then finally a close-up. I looked straight into the camera, my hair pulled back, no frills, no apology. Success never needed their permission. The words hung for just a moment before dissolving into the Solara logo, sharp and white against a dark background. A beat later, another line appeared beneath it. Founder and CEO Natalie Brooks. The screen dimmed. There was no applause, not yet. Just the quiet of understanding, or maybe recalibration. I finally turned around. Evelyn hadn't moved, but her mouth was slightly open. One hand rested on her clutch, the other on the arm of her chair, fingers slack. She looked like someone who had walked into a story halfway through and realized she wasn't the main character anymore. Vanessa didn't say a word. Her eyes were wide, not in shock, but something heavier, like she was running through every memory of me. Every skipped acknowledgement, every backhanded "she's always quiet," and finding herself in all of them. Spencer blinked twice, then leaned slightly toward her. "We tried to buy Solara 6 months ago," he whispered. He thought I wouldn't hear him, but I did. My father sat very still, his expression unreadable, the way it always was when he didn't want to weigh in. But his hand was on his knee, thumb tracing an invisible line over the fabric of his pants. I'd seen that movement before, when he watched stock prices dip, or when something clicked in his mind, but he wasn't ready to speak. Aunt Karen dabbed her mouth with a napkin she hadn't used all meal. I could have walked out right then, let the moment sit like a perfectly timed checkmate. But that was never the point. This wasn't about winning anything. It was about presence, ownership, not in dollars or articles, but in acknowledgement. The quartet began to stir. A violinist repositioned her bow. I stepped forward slightly. Not to the mic, not to the altar, just far enough that they'd have to see me standing there, not as a placeholder in a back row, but as the woman who had been quietly reshaping the very world they read about in headlines and never imagined I could touch. I looked at Evelyn. For once, she didn't look away. I held her gaze. She opened her mouth like she wanted to say something, but no sound came. Jasmine had asked me once why I didn't tell them earlier, why I let them believe I was someone else entirely, and I remember answering, because they already decided what role I was supposed to play. I just chose not to argue. Now, the script had flipped. No shouting, no retaliation, just truth. And in a family that spent decades polishing surfaces, I had finally broken through the glass. Without ever needing to raise my voice. The ceremony hadn't begun, but something far more permanent had. The violinists started playing again, a soft melody, familiar and well-rehearsed. But nobody was listening, not really. Some guests sipped their champagne with exaggerated focus, pretending to be engrossed in the citrus notes. Others shuffled napkins or scrolled their phones, eyes flicking up nervously anytime I moved. I stood near the back corner of the reception tent, close enough to the dessert table to admire the lemon tartlets, but far enough from the center to keep my breathing steady. The chandeliers swayed gently from the fans overhead, their reflections dancing across the linen tablecloths. Outside the clear walls of the tent, fireflies blinked in the softening dusk, uncaring and untethered. My father was talking to a judge he used to golf with. I could see the crease forming between his brows, a signal that he hadn't yet figured out how to explain me. Or maybe he was just calculating what this meant for the family brand. Across the room, Spencer kept his arm looped around Vanessa's waist, though she seemed more statue than bride now. Her smile had cracked at the edges, as if too much truth had settled into her bones. Evelyn approached. Her heels barely made a sound on the wood-paneled floor, but I felt her before I saw her. Years of second-guessing had trained me to anticipate the tone before it arrived. She stood beside me, close but not touching. Her mouth curved upward thinly. "You could have told us," she said. I turned toward her just slightly. "Would you have listened?" She blinked once. "You've always had a flair for timing. I've always had a sense of when people are finally paying attention." She looked away then, toward the tent entrance where a pair of flower girls chased each other between table legs. This was supposed to be Vanessa's weekend. I nodded. And now it still is, just remembered differently. She didn't respond. After a moment, she walked away, her perfume lingering in the air like unfinished conversation. A waiter appeared beside me with a tray of mini pecan pies. I declined with a small smile. My phone buzzed. "Jasmine, you're trending." Jasmine. Forbes and TechCrunch just ran the clip. Press conference confirmed for Monday. I typed a quick reply. Me. Good. Keep it simple. Lead with the product, not the twist. Jasmine. Understood. Jasmine. Also, I'm proud of you. I stared at that last message for a second longer than necessary. Then I locked the screen and slid the phone into my bag. At the front of the room, Vanessa rose. She tapped her glass with a knife. Once, then again. The room fell quiet, but not expectant. Just still. "I'd like to thank everyone," she began, her voice lighter than it had been all evening, though the strain showed, "for joining us today, for celebrating with us, and for your patience through some surprises." Soft laughter trickled from a few tables, uncertain and uneven. "I'm grateful for my family," she continued. "For my husband, of course, and for those who continue to show up in whatever form they choose." She didn't look at me. She didn't have to. The toast ended quickly, and the applause was polite. No one stood. I waited until the room settled again, then walked slowly toward the center. Not rushed, not rehearsed, just present. I reached the microphone, tapped it once to test. The sound clicked gently into the tent. I looked at the faces. Some were curious, some embarrassed. Others braced, unsure of what I might do with the spotlight now that I'd stepped into it. I cleared my throat. "There's a particular kind of silence," I began, "that doesn't come from peace. It comes from being overlooked, from being dismissed, from being invited late, or not at all." No one moved. "Silence can be painful," I said, "but sometimes, if you learn to live inside it long enough, it sharpens. It teaches you to listen, to plan, to choose your moment." I glanced toward my mother, whose gaze was fixed on the tablecloth in front of her. My father sat like a man watching a chessboard he no longer controlled. "I didn't come here today to steal anything," I continued. "Not attention, not a spotlight. I came here to show that even the quiet ones are writing stories, ones you never see coming." I paused. "And for me? Silence wasn't a prison. It was preparation." I lifted my glass. "To silence," I said. "It can be painful or powerful. I chose power." This time, no one laughed, but a few guests raised their glasses, slowly, uncertainly, as if trying to decide which version of me they now believed in. I stepped back, left the mic, walked calmly to the espresso cart and asked for a decaf Americano with just a splash of cream. As the barista handed it to me, I felt a presence behind me. Spencer. His voice came low, nearly a whisper. She played all of us. I didn't turn. Vanessa answered before I could. "No," she said from just behind him. She waited. The words hung in the air like the final note of a well-played song. I took a sip of my coffee and let the warmth settle. The night moved forward, slowly, awkwardly, but forward. For the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like I was on the sidelines of my own life. I was exactly where I needed to be, not because I had claimed the room, but because I had made them finally look. I thought I was leaving quietly, slipping out while the fireflies still danced and the catering team folded linens under soft amber lights. My heels tapped softly across the flagstone as I stepped into the chill of a late September evening. It was 10:30. The celebration had softened into a murmur of leftover cake and conversations no one would remember. Jasmine was already waiting in the car. Her sedan idled near the gate, headlights cutting 2 narrow lines through the gravel driveway. The engine hummed steady, low and warm. I pulled the door handle and slid into the back seat. Jasmine turned halfway, one elbow propped on the center console. "Everything okay?" she asked. I nodded. Better than okay. I didn't elaborate. She didn't push. She turned back to her screen. "We're wheels up at 7. DC's ready." I leaned back against the seat, let the leather catch the tension still lingering in my shoulders. That's when I heard it. A light knock on the window. I glanced up. My mother. She stood on the driver's side just behind Jasmine. Her makeup had faded in patches around her eyes, and one earring was missing. She didn't look composed. She looked human. I pressed the button and let the window lower a few inches. "Why now?" she asked softly. Her voice didn't carry the edge it usually had. It was thinner, rawer. I looked at her, really looked. The posture she always kept straight had wilted slightly. The careful updo was coming undone. And in her expression, I saw something new. Not regret, exactly. Not apology. But the beginning of something that might become both. "You didn't see me, Mom," I said. "That doesn't mean I wasn't becoming." She swallowed hard. "We thought you were okay with the background." "I was," I said, "until I wasn't." She nodded, once, slowly, then stepped back. No grand gesture, no final plea, just space. The window rose again, soft and soundless. We were about to pull away when Vanessa appeared from the side path near the catering tent. She walked briskly, but without urgency. Her dress was wrinkled at the hem, and she carried her shoes in one hand. She stopped beside the car and leaned down, eyes meeting mine through the glass. "I meant what I said during my toast," she said, voice even. I tilted my head slightly. "Which part?" "That you showed up in your own way," she said. Then after a pause, "But now I see you." I looked at her for a long second. "That's enough," I said. She gave a small nod and stepped back. No tears, no explanations, just acknowledgement. And in families like ours, that was more than I'd ever expected. Jasmine tapped twice on her phone screen, signaling the driver. "DC's waiting," she murmured. The car eased forward. I turned my head to look out the rear window. The estate slipped away in pieces, the lanterns, the hydrangeas, the guests still lingering near the valet stand. Evelyn's figure faded into the shadows beneath the stone archway. Vanessa, half lit by the last garden lamp, stood still, watching us leave. I took one last look, not to gloat, not to grieve, just to remember. When you grow up being told to keep your head down, you get good at watching, at reading rooms, parsing tone, sensing the weight behind what isn't said. But tonight I'd spoken, not loudly, not dramatically, just enough. The gate opened slowly in front of us. The gravel shifted under the tires, and just as the rear-view mirror caught its last glimpse of the house, I saw him. My father. He stood at the edge of the wraparound porch, hands in his pockets. No expression, no wave. But as the car pulled farther down the driveway, I heard something. He was speaking to someone near him, maybe a guest, maybe no one at all. And he said it plain, like a fact he'd known all along, but only now remembered how to say. "That's my daughter." I didn't turn around. I just leaned into the seat, eyes forward, hands still. We didn't leave with noise. We left with clarity. Sometimes the quietest goodbye leaves the deepest echo. As the headlights faded into the night, what lingered wasn't noise, but clarity. In families, we don't always see each other clearly until someone steps beyond the version we've built of them. And yet, love has room to grow even in silence, especially when we stop expecting people to explain their worth. If this story reminded you of your own quiet strength, or someone who once waited too long to be heard, feel free to share your thoughts. I'd love to know what you're carrying and what you've let go.